Hi, I'm Randy Wooden, and welcome to another in the Wooden Group's Edge Library Series. And now for In Transition, folks, we'll talk a little bit about the challenge of, hey, you're overqualified, and how to deal with that. There are several things to consider. One is from your perspective, and whether it's something that indeed you are overqualified for. Also, to consider the employer's perspective. And they're looking at you saying, well, if we hire you, we don't doubt that you can do the job. Our concern is you're a flight risk. You may only stay here for a short period of time because, let's face it, the money's not what you're accustomed to making, and perhaps the challenge and even the growth potential isn't enough to keep you there. And so when the economy gets better or whatever, you're going to leave. And so we're only sort of renting you for a short period of time. That's a concern that employers have, and quite frankly, it's a valid concern. On the one hand, you'd think that an employer would want bang for the buck. I mean, as a consumer, that's what we want. We'd love to get a $20,000 vehicle for 10 grand, but you know what? The reality is, if it should sell for 20 and somebody has 10 grand on it, there's a reason they're selling it for 10. You and I know that. And so the same thing applies typically from the company's perspective. They look at you and you're a let's say an $80,000 person, and you're looking to take a job paying 40. What's wrong with this picture? I mean, so you've got to deal with that. Now, there are a couple things to consider. One is what your resume looks like. If that's the first thing they see, there's a term I use from time to time called dumbing down the resume. And simply what that means is tailor the resume to the job description. If you have a master's degree or another advanced sort of degree, and it doesn't require that, then you might want to consider leaving it off. I know it's sort of a kick to your gut here, but if they're saying degree preferred, then certainly if you have a master's degree, I would very much consider leaving that off. I'd also look back at the experience level that I have, and I would look at some of these titles that I have on my resume. And if my titles say vice president or director or something like that, and I'm applying for a job that's nowhere near that, I may want to go with a more descriptive title along the lines of management, member of management team, or something along those lines, to help make the titles not so distant. You want to kind of have the titles match on a resume. Also look back at how many years you actually have on the resume, whether you go back 10 to maybe 15 years. Beyond that, once you get that 17, 18, 20, 25 year period, that's a little bit too much. And again, subsequently people look at that and they say, okay, well, this person has this experience, therefore they probably are earning at X amount, and so they may be overqualified. So that's the resume itself. Keep in mind, again, make job titles match as closely as you can. Strip dates away from education. Consider dropping some of the education that you have, and also go back probably about 15 years, depending on what the job that you're applying for is really looking for. The other aspect deals with salary concerns, and that's something that is a very personal topic for many people. It's one of the last things you want to talk about with an employer. But here again, if you're answering, let's say, an online application, you're trying to fill that out, and it says, what are your salary requirements? That's easier, because then you can pretty much guesstimate what the job is going to pay and put in that box what you believe it's going to pay. The more difficult question typically is, what is your salary history and what did you used to make at a certain company? Now, it's probably the only time I'm ever going to suggest to somebody that they might want to consider lying on this whole job search. But the truth, the reality is, if you were making 80 and this job's likely to pay in the 40s, and you put that you were making 80, you will not, repeat, not get considered for that job. I don't care what anybody tells you, you're not going to get considered, especially when they're sitting on a pile of applications. Many people who are very similar to you, maybe have less experience but are right on target. You're too far off. You will get screened out. So if you're knowledgeable that the job pays, let's say, 40s or even in the 50s, if you're knowledgeable that it pays in that range and you're okay with working within that range, then put a dollar amount that is at the very upper end of that range or even slightly above that. I wouldn't go a whole lot more than 15% above what you think the high end of that job is likely to pay. Most companies never do check what you earned in a past position. Most companies won't even divulge that. Again, it's an ethical issue that you have to deal with on a job search. But look, if you're sitting there saying, I can do that job, I want that job, I want to at least get my crack at it, I want to bat my hand at home plate, and I want to try to get a hit here, if you put that 80,000, you will not get looked at. That's just the truth. And believe me on this, and I've talked to a number of people involved with this. So those are some things you need to deal with from the gee, I'm overqualified standpoint. And there's some more things we can touch on in further library series. And that'll wrap up this series on the in-transition part of your job hunt dealing with, gosh, you're overqualified. My name is Randy Wooden. Thank you for watching.